The last images I found, long after she was gone, were images of her childhood. They were taken in late 1943 at a Polish refugee camp near Mount Kilimanjaro in East Africa. The women and children in this lost footage were refugees far from home near the end of the Second World War. They might have thought that the camera was sent to capture their story. The images were meant to be edited and narrated over for a wartime newsreel. But that newsreel was never made. The footage was sent to London and sat on a shelf for 75 years. These images have never been seen by the public and were only uncovered while I was making this film. For me, who grew up hearing about this place, they were images I'd spent a lifetime imagining. The first thing I can remember about my Polish grandmother is her voice. I was 4 years old, laying on her floor in Montreal and looking at a world map. She hovered over me and whispered about where she'd grown up. Before I'd ever understood that she was from Poland and what that meant, I knew that she'd lived in East Africa as a refugee. As I got older, she told me about being deported from Poland to the Soviet Union when she was 11 years old, and of 10 years wandering, displaced. She spoke about burying family in Siberia, Kazakhstan, and Iran. I was surrounded by women like her, telling the same stories, and who spoke of hundreds of thousands of others. But the older I got, the less I paid attention to them. The first time I picked up a video camera, I was 15, and my grandmother walked into frame.
You're getting babcha? Okay. Hi, Randy. Cheers.
The camera drifted away from her, and it would be 15 years before I filmed her again. Then, when I was 19 at university, I wrote about Polish refugees in Africa. A professor challenged my history, though. He'd never read about it. Why didn't her history seem to exist?
So the flower is going to be on the way, no?
Yeah, as they are now, they're in the way. That's better.
You have to be seen too?
No, not necessarily. Maybe I will after, though. Not sure yet. For now, we'll say no. I'm not going to be seen. So I just wanted to ask you a couple questions that are going to sound stupid coming from me, because I'm your grandson and I already know the answer.
Mm-hmm.
But it's just to ask you the question just to practice for me, asking people silly questions like, what is your name? Where were you born? And who your family was or where your family was.
Okay.
So that's kind of the question. What's your name?
Right.
Where were you born? And
So you're asking now?
I'm asking now.
Okay. 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 Well, I was born in Poland, in East Poland, and my family name is Gerech. It was two brothers and a sister and me, 4 of us. We have grandparents, both sides, but they were living separate. And I don't know, what else do you want to know?
That's it. Just the details.
Yeah, I'm so serious.
Are you still so serious?
No, I'm not.
Were you serious?
I guess I was serious that time. That's from Africa, this one. My father, my mother, Chiula, that's when she came from Nairobi. Is something black here on my cheek?
Oh, that's just the mouse.
Oh. And my little brother, Well, in Africa here, long, long time ago.
Maybe you can tell me what life was like in the village where you were born.
In Poland.
In Poland. You can tell me the name of the village and what kind of community it was like.
Well, it was Osada, called Osada Ostrówek. And everybody lived on their own land. So it wasn't a village which is house next to each other. This is everybody live on his own land. And I can't really say much because I don't remember much from Poland. I remember more from the time they took us to Siberia. That part I remember. Well, they took us February 10. First, they pick up my grandparents. We just saw hardly through the window because the day was very cold. And they block our doors, so my mother was crying and begging them she wanted to see her parents. They just took them, both of them, put on the sledge and drove them away. About 2 hours later, they came for us. One of those soldiers told my parents that you take whatever you can. Where you're going, you're going to need it. And my father knew they were going to take us to Siberia.
We have a big, not suitcase, it's a wooden one, like, you know, things I know. We keep putting things there. And I can put food and clothes and bedding, because that's why we have in Russia what we've got there.
When I took us to the train, they throw us, they open the door and like, shh, like luggage, you know, one after another. And my father was staying with his horses and sled, and he didn't know what to do. He said he was so mixed up. And Russian, they come to him, "Przywódca jest gdzieś, pojeżdżaj domoj", tak zaczął krzyczeć started to yell at my father, and he just, oh my God. And then he said, "My family is there." They took him like a ball and thrown a train.
That was the moment that I knew I'm leaving my country, going into unknown, and we are praying on our knees because we are leaving the country. We don't know what to expect, where we are going, what for we are going, and what will happen to us. Suddenly, you are on a strange place and locked.
Most individuals in the West, certainly in the United States, are not aware even today that in September 1939, Poland was invaded not just by the Nazis, but also by the Soviet Union. The story of these deportations and the tragedies that they brought to so many families is very little known outside of Poland. The deportees from Poland were predominantly, but not exclusively, of Polish ethnicity. Maybe 55% were ethnic Poles, 55, 57. Estimates are that perhaps 30% were Jews, and the rest were ethnic Ukrainians and Belarusians. And they actually came from all walks of life. Without a doubt, it's the elites who were overrepresented because the Soviets were trying to depolonize the territory that they had just annexed.
Actually, it was a long Russian tradition. It preceded the Bolsheviks. It was the Tsarists were doing it. You destabilize a society by removing its huge segments of the population. You also, by doing population transfers, you change the facts on the ground. So we were arrested, like tens of thousands of other people, and loaded up and shipped off, in our case, to a camp in the Urals, but quite far north, just below the Arctic Circle.
From 1940 to 41, the Soviet Union emptied eastern Poland of up to 1 million people considered hostile to its occupation and used them to create new colonies of forced laborers across Siberia. While their parents were used as forced laborers in forests, cotton fields, and mines, children like my grandmother, who were too young to work, were sent to school to be transformed into the next generation of Soviets. She described it to me as a prison without walls. They were surrounded by death in the camps, but not by fences. If you walked out of the camp, though, you'd be surrounded by millions of square kilometers of Siberian forest.
When I'm talking to you, I don't think it was real. It's like a dream, bad dream comes now. I still remember eating the grass. I was so hungry. You know, you don't know what to do, how to help yourself. You lost.
The first time I went back to the village my family was from, I had to realize that it wasn't even in Poland anymore. At the end of the Second World War, its borders had shifted 300 kilometers west, as if the entire country had been lifted up by the war and forcibly displaced. Which is how I ended up in Belarus, White Russia, land claimed by 7 different countries over the last 100 years, making it hard for anyone to find their ancestors. At the border, my bags were searched by soldiers who asked me what I wanted to film, and I told them where we were from, but I didn't even know where that was. Under the fields of Belarus are the ruins of hundreds of villages occupied by the Soviet Union at the beginning of the war, burnt down by the Nazis in the middle of it, and then bulldozed by the Soviets when it was all over. I was going directly past where my grandmother had been born, but I wouldn't know that for another year. A year later, I went back with an old Polish map that seemed to lay the world of my grandmother's memory onto the landscape. But half of the villages on it had been erased, and those that were left had Belarusian names. Which is why instead of a place called Ostrowek, I was in Ryazany, a neighboring town where my grandmother had been baptized.
Może i widziała, Kazimierza była, tak?
Kazimiera Gierech.
No może ja widziała, mnie raz te starsze kobiety ja widziała, ale nie mogę teraz wyobrazić. Tu dużo wywieźli na Sibir, nawet i moje родственники popadli w Sibir. Ja przepraszam, że nie mogę dać informacji o
Nie,
tych,
no ничего, спасибо.
ale jednak przyjemnie, że porozmawiałam z państwem. Tak, z panem tym.
Остромича был.
Ostrovich, I don't know, in Polish it was
На польском это было как
It's a Polish village.
Там было
Near-
очень много поляков.
drop near
Не,
the...
это Гродненская
Возле
область.
капли где-то, возле капли.
Гродненская область это.
But my babcia said it was 5 kilometers
Вы
from...
бабушка, что это 5 километров.
На руки тут, тут у нас тепло, во-первых, а она говорит,
What is it?
холодно, холодно.
He
Что тут
said that
холодно?
it's quite warm now, but you can see that you know warm in your hands.
Мы-то уже укололи, говорится, да. Я тоже не переводил. Что, не выпивает? Нет.
Нет, почему?
Ну, все, а вот.
На здоровье. yeah.
О, спасибо.
I started filming whatever I thought my grandmother might remember. The ruins of a castle that made it feel like the war had just ended. And in a town that used to be 3/4 Jewish, the remains of a synagogue. In the town square, a monument commemorated 51 surrounding villages burnt down by the Nazis. It says that the Second World War began in 1941. In the former Soviet Union, what happened in the 2 previous years is never mentioned.
In 1940.
А где жили, на какой улице?
Ну, они как бы не в самих Рожанах, они вроде как в Островок.
Островок, есть такая деревня.
Он просто думал, что уже как бы нету такой деревни больше.
Есть, и люди там живут.
Don't know where Ostrava is.
Мы просто там не знаем, где это.
Ой, это недалеко, это 10 километров. Ну, можно и по этой трассе, и потом поворот. Щитно есть, щитно написано. И оттуда поворотик Островок. Да, близкое от Островка.
Yeah.
Так
It's
что
like a-
побывайте обязательно там. Может,
Да,
кто
ну,
помнит
постараемся
бабушку?
заехать.
Конечно.
Хорошо, спасибо.
I had looked around for days, trying to film anything connected to my family. And now, only a few hours before we were planning on leaving the country, I was turning down a road towards the village they had been deported from more than 70 years earlier.
Скажите, а может быть вы знали, или может быть ваша мама, не бабушки знали, такие жили здесь раньше Ерих, Казимира и Юлия, может быть?
Знаете, я вам покажу. Вот этот дядька знает все. Вот этот дядька, он давно живет, он нам все рассказывает.
Да. Нам сказали, что здесь какой-то дедушка старый живет.
И что?
Вот, он нам мог сказать, что здесь когда давно очень жили поляки, звали Герих Юлия и Герих Казимира.
Я не знаю. Сейчас я здравствуйте. Сейчас я спрошу. Минутку, девочка.
Хорошо. Знает? He said he knows. Хорошо, только машину в бок поставлю.
Поставьте в сторону. Проходите. Тут мы по хозяйству. Ходит, садись там, на диване. Садись, они по ней понимаете по-русски.
Oh, sorry. Cold.
Ну то, что вы хотите узнать эту?
Это просто вот Джонатан, его бабушка, Казимира, Герих Казимира. Они жили здесь, именно вот в этой деревне. Всю жизнь прожили здесь.
Всю жизнь. Всю жизнь.
Ты говори, которые жили раньше. Ты же знал поляков много, ты же мне рассказываешь.
О, что рассказывал. Я у всех, которые здесь жили, и в школу разом мы ходили.
Не, ну это правильно, ты назови им, кого ты знаешь.
Тихо. Ты не забегай наперед. Бо я забываю еще и так.
Ну говори, говори.
А Герих знали?
Гериха, конечно, знал. Янек был, а другого забыл еще уже.
Янек.
Янек был.
Was who?
Санова?
Yeah, it's the son. It's my uncle.
Да, это его дядя,
Был Яnek.
получается.
Yeah.
Это его дядя.
Yannick.
дядька
Yannick, there was four. Yannick, Yulia, Kaja, and Poldek was a baby.
Ну, то Яник это. Интересный был такие. Такие цветные. В школу разом ходили.
Еще детство посмотрели, где эта бабка жила. Здесь недалеко, рядышком.
А там еще что-нибудь осталось от этой свадьбы? Или там уже ничего нет?
Гераха этого. Гераха нет, просто лес.
Вот это его, их Герах. Как мы называем. Поедем в Герах.
They call the territory Gerach and they always say, let's go to Gerach to collect some
Вот до сих пор оно и числится Герахом. До сих пор. Поэтому, вот вы приехали, поэтому я сейчас вот знаю, чего он называется Герахом. Поэтому начинается это, она еле должна помнить. Должна помнить. Я так предполагаю, что дом стоял где-то вот там вот. Потому что там все,
somewhere there should be,
все
house,
маленькое,
house?
там
Yeah.
ничего нету такого.
But
Вот туда вот вглубь.
Is there anything
Там
left?
ничего нету. Вот. Поэтому
Ostruvek, Osada Ostruvek. OS, that's where we were, yeah. OS Ostruvek, that's, yeah, Shitno, Ostruvek.
Did you live on the stream on this side, on that side, or
Oh, wait a minute. I think on this side.
you were still part
Like
of the
Stoneport, they were living higher there. Mackiewicz, Wujek Marian were closer, going this way.
So we drove like this, and then we turned on this road, and we came up. And they said that all of this land here belonged to Gerach.
Yeah.
What did you think when I showed you pictures of
Poland, the Ostruvek. Well, it was a little bit sad for me and excitement and little bit, I feel depressed a little bit. It's nothing there where we live, nothing.
Why were we looking at the exact same images and seeing completely different things? I'd come home excited at having images of my grandmother's childhood village to show her, but I brought back something I didn't understand. For me, who couldn't mourn what I hadn't lost, I thought I'd found proof of what had existed. But for her, it was proof of everything that had been erased. The more I spoke to her, the more it started bringing out a contradiction between what she needed to remember and what she wanted to forget. When the camera was turned off, she told me that the only thing worse than talking about it was staying quiet, knowing that it had been forgotten by everyone else.
It's amazing how news traveled. You know, you'd think that at a time like this, I mean, no phones, certainly never had cell phones, no phones of any, no landline anywhere, but news traveled. People sent notes and sent things, and people knew that there was a Polish army going to be formed, and it was somewhere in the south. So all the prisoners who could get out headed south.
We were free, so everybody was in a hurry to get somewhere. So we managed on a cattle train, and we went from Siberia to the south part of Russia, because we were looking for the soldiers. My two brothers went first, and we lost them in Russia.
We traveled, I guess, about months. And the trains, they used to stop only somewhere, not in the town, because people were stealing food. I remember it stopped somewhere in the fields, And people found out that somewhere they can get, not very far, some water. So my sister went, and then coming back, train started to move, and she was running. My mother was screaming because she could see through the door, open little bit door, that we weren't very far from the end of the train. So she could see her running, but she was running with the pail. She didn't want to drop the pail. Was some man, I think, at the end of the train who, again, came late. So they just grabbed and managed to it was a few steps that you can stand there. And they grabbed my sister, and she was holding that pail of water. I mean, it wasn't full pail, it was maybe half of it.
It was terrifying that time. It wasn't nothing really long way from one way or other. And I'm in train, I have the passing, that was just passing and going, so where could I go? And my father won't leave me, then he would jump off, and but then he would lose others. So you see, it wasn't, but I couldn't throw that water away, that bucket with water away. I know I was only 14, but I knew what that meant to us.
The train story was one that they'd tell me over and over again. When I was young, I'd picture how exciting it would be to run after a train and be pulled onto it at the last second, like in a movie. Then I started meeting the survivors who had been separated from their families and had never seen them again. The Poles were given papers releasing them from thousands of forced labor camps across Siberia. The irony of being liberated is that they were even more vulnerable than inside the camps. Without train tickets, clothing, food, money, or support, a wave of starving deportees needed to make their way alone to where the Polish Anders Army was forming, in the southern part of the Soviet Union.
That should have been already in a grave. People were dying around me, and I don't know how I survived. Being very, very thin and skinny. I was attacked by the Russian boy. I didn't realize what he wanted from me. I didn't report because I was so scared. I just told my sister not to go in the field and pick up the wood for fire.
The hardest experience with us was in Uzbekistan. Siberia, whatever, I mean, we were hungry, was not much food, but at least a little bit bread. You could buy it like 200 grams bread for people that don't work, and for working people 400 grams. But Uzbekistan, that was horrible, horrible. So.
The Polish prime minister in London was able to convince or get Stalin to agree to evacuate this newly formed Polish army, but also surviving family members from Soviet territory out of the Soviet Union across the Caspian Sea to Iran.
So we managed to get on the ship, came to Parlevi. There we were washed clothes. The hair was cut because of the insects, etc., etc. And we were free. And every time I meet in Canada somebody from Tehran, from Iran, I am so friendly with them. because there were people throwing boiled eggs at us, throwing bread at us, saying, welcome, 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 their language. It was like a miracle. You have no idea how you feel coming from hell into heaven.
Wanderers upon the face of the earth. Patriots from Poland, nearing the end of one of the most amazing marches in history. 3,000 weary miles they've walked to find a haven of refuge.
Two years after disappearing into Siberia as forced laborers, the deportees reappeared again in Iran as refugees. American and British newsreels like this one filmed Poles arriving in Iran. The refugees in them were real, but these scenes were all staged. These films also shifted the facts. The British and American newsreels claimed that the Polish refugees were victims of the Nazis, not of the Soviets.
From one little town in Poland, 1,000 men, women, and children fled from the Nazis into Russia. When the Nazis followed, they pushed on, through mountain and desert, 3,000 miles to Persia, to a haven in Iran on the Caspian Sea.
Behind the scenes, though, the British were helping the Polish government in exile gather testimony about what the Poles had survived. More than 30 years before the Soviet writer Alexander Solzhenitsyn would release The Gulag Archipelago, 118,000 Polish citizens in Iran were testifying about the catastrophically repressive forced labor system in the Soviet Union, but their voices would almost totally disappear.
The Polish army asked the Poles who came out of the Soviet Union to describe what happened to them. There are incredible documents, including 30,000 mostly handwritten depositions or statements filled with detail, especially because these were written in 1942, 1943, when the details were still very, very fresh. No one outside of the Soviet Union had access to this kind of information before, to what it was like to live in these Soviet settlements and to work in the Gulag. The Polish government in exile wanted to make sure they had first-hand information about the treatment that Polish citizens received at the hands of the Soviets after the invasion and annexation of Eastern Poland. There was an expectation that the Western Allies would not stand for the Soviets permanently annexing the territory, and they wanted to show how they behaved.
While they were recovering in Iran, one of the first things the refugees did was pose for a family photograph. Why would refugees rush to get their picture taken? Maybe to show their families, spread out in other places, that they were alive. But looking at these women and children, maybe it was to prove it to themselves as well. The deportees had no images of Siberia, but these photos, captured in Iran, feel like monuments to what they'd survived. This photo, taken in Tehran, is the earliest image of my grandmother's life. All of their family photographs from Poland had been lost during the deportations. My great-grandmother is 36 years old. Her son is 10. My grandmother is barely 12. This fraction of a second in Tehran is of a fragmented family in the middle of war. When everything else was gone, memory was the one thing that could only be taken with their lives.
Ja chodzę i szukam, bo to super. Wszyscy myśleli, że
To na pewno w Afryce.
które?
Bo w Teheranie...
To było w fazie robione.
No to może tak, to tak. Ale ty tutaj z nami nie jesteś, to na pewno w Afryce. Ale myśmy nie mogli 1,5 roku.
You saw them in Africa, them. Nice to see.
How long has it been since you saw her last time?
I don't know, it's 5 years or something. It's really nice one to see my sister. Maybe you never know. Maybe last time. I mean, I'm 82. She's nearly 80. So I prefer she was here, so we could be together. No, I'm really sorry we don't live in the same country. It's too far to keep going to one another.
What can I say this? Yeah, no, yeah, that was when he went to Africa. Married Stanisławów. Oh, he was born in Stanisławów, 1900. Oval face, blonde hair, blue eyes. You know, you forget. It's 1940, we were leaving Siberia, 1941, late. Well, it was 1942 when we went to Uzbekistan. Beginning of 1942, I think.
Wow. 1941. And then 1941.
End of 1941, yeah.
Yeah, Christmas Eve we spent in Tehran. I was first.
1942.
1941. I mean, that's only 2 years. 1940 in Siberia, and then 1941. That's 2 years, I'm afraid.
Do you have the papers?
Oh, well, where can I look?
Yeah, because I have the papers, visa, when we arrived to East Africa, when we arrived there. And it's 1943 we arrived there.
Pierwsze lato ja zrobiłam. 14 lat. Jak raz we wrześniu skończyłam 14 lat. Ja w ten czas oberwałam tą nerkę.
Anyway, ja się nie będę sprzeczać. Ja
No ja wiem, bo ja
wiem
wiem,
tylko
pracowałam.
tyle, żeby w 1943 przyjechali do Afryki. Bo ja to mam gdzieś. I patrzyłam, przeglądałam papiery, bo ja mam papiery.
No popatrz jeszcze raz.
No tu nie mogę, dopiero
No ale
wrócę do
zależy jak
Kanady.
długo w Teheraniśmy byli, bo to tylko
6
przyjechali.
miesięcy.
No a my tylko przyjechali. No ale tylko papiery to tam, co byłam.
No to nie, to nam nic nie da.
To nie da nic.
No. Wizę jakbyś miała, bo ty też musisz mieć tą wizę. Wjazd do Afryki. Ja mam ją, ale nie tutaj. I na moim, no na moim, ja zobaczę na moim też.
Still trying to figure it out?
No.
Yeah, look.
The date, she said it says March 11, 1940.
Look, this said March 11. Look at that.
And here it says, wait a minute, here. Okay. Is that gonna be date? 1943?
Looks like 1943.
I don't know. I'm gonna look my visa. I have
Yeah,
this
you
one
have the
too.
same one.
Yeah.
Maybe the handwriting is clear.
Yeah, but I mean, here is stamp, so you can't be wrong with stamp.
I don't know. Dates like this, I don't know.
I'm
No
looking
answer.
on that because that's stamp.
No
so
answer, yeah.
that's it.
Is it a problem if you can't?
No, it's
if
not a
people have different memories.
It's not a problem really, but it's just, you can, I mean, all of us realize that we just don't remember exactly dates, the time, the dates, even in this case, like even a year is a difference because it's so long ago that Mine doesn't work that well. I remember now, but I might forget again, so you have to put somewhere in a piece of paper or something.
Wow. That's why I can tape it. So
Oh.
Because the camera doesn't forget.
Oh, it doesn't forget. Good, good. Because I might forget, like lots of other things.
Coming out of the war with nothing but a handful of documents, their history as child prisoners mostly existed in memory. But when they had different memories of the same events, what did that mean for the history? On that same trip, we traveled across Sheffield to visit the graves of my great-grandparents, who had come from East Africa to England in 1949 as refugees. It was the only time my grandmother asked me to film anything, and when we got there, the camera stuttered and broke down, and this was all I had left. The camera saw what I didn't back then, that I came from a family whose history only existed in fragments of photographs, fragments of documents, and fragments of memory.
Poland ikija, sijui mngetaka niwafahamishe Poland ilikuja lini. Nakumbuka tu walipokuja, waliletwa na train. Wakaja pale, Coastal pale, station railway pale. Wakashuka pale. Maana ya Tengeru hii kuitwa Tengeru ni ile.
Mimi niliadishiwa na wale wa kutangulia. Wakasema ilikuwa iko vita kule nyumbani kwao. Alafu ndio akahamishwa na Mwingereza kuletwa hapa. Akawa kama mateka. Ndio.
Walikuja mwaka 42. Basi lakini walikuja kwa kuletwa na serikali ya Kiingereza. Wakaanza kulima, kufuga ng'ombe. Ng'ombe zinaletwa kutoka Kenya. Kazi yangu ilikuwa ni askari kuwalinda na kulinda zile mali zao. Kama vile ng'ombe, maziwa na wao wenyewe. Ndio.
Yapo kushikwa na humala kontumoni upita vati kuzuma ni nani ule ni nani.
Those are the little houses we lived in. And those little things you see that are doors and things, those are door openings. There is no door, no screen. You can imagine the first night sleeping there. You've just traveled across a plain with all these wild animals, and now you're living in a hut that has no door.
When the night comes, you go to bed and you want to sleep and you can't sleep for the first couple of days. The jungle is coming to life.
Kwanza Waafrika wakati wao walikuwa wanaogopa wazungu sana. Walikuwa wanaogopa wazungu sana. Lakini walipokuja tukazoeana. Ushirikiano ukawa mkubwa tu.
We were scared, must tell you, because they make such a noise. They were so happy to see us that we didn't know how to take that noise, whether it's joy or madness or whatever.
Mapolandi wao walikuwa wanatutembelea huko Meru. Walikuwa wengi, kwa hiyo tunashirikiana wote. Za ngoma wanapanda kwenye ngoma, tulikuwa tunacheza huko juu, ngoma za Kimeru.
the way they walk, they jump a little bit and they, woo, woo, and they're marching, yeah. And you can hear the ground practically, you know, moving.
Where Siberia had been darkness and cold, and marked by death and deprivation, Africa was heat and color and life. Tanganyika is a Swahili name meaning sailing in the wilderness. And since that's how the refugee children were growing up, they were the most adept at doing that. The first modern refugee camps in Africa were for Europeans. 20,000 Polish women and children spread out in 24 villages in 6 African countries. For the Polish children growing up there, what they would later call Africa was less about geography than a shared experience.
Something like this to see, it's you know, I don't know, it's hard to believe for people who didn't see this.
Oh, Africa is beautiful. I don't know, but Africa is beautiful. Sunk in my mind and in my body. I don't know. I miss.
Well, if I meet anybody from Africa, I feel like 18. You know, because your memory takes you back. This is the class. No windows, no doors. It was just the roof, and as you can see here, some walls, but the rest wasn't covered because there was no glass.
There's a wonderful picture of possibly the first school, well, one of the first schools in Africa, and the kids are sitting on rocks or something, but they're at school. Schools were that important. They knew that children had to be placed in schools, their education had to begin, their cultural upbringing had to begin, their minds had to be engaged. The children were sort of a national treasure. They had to be looked after because they would go back to a devastated country and rebuild it.
There's a long tradition in Poland because of the period of partitions, the loss of independence, that men go off to fight and sacrifice themselves on the quote-unquote altar of the fatherland, and women were long tasked with preparing a new generation of Poles, teaching them, instilling in them Polish language and literature and history and stories.
Being in Africa, it was a quiet place, far away from war. We were safe from bombardments. We were safe from the disaster of war. So the 6 years we were in a quiet place. When we came out of Africa, we were ready to face the world.
For the British authorities, the Poles' status as white refugees created problems. They were European, but they lived in traditional huts, not colonial houses. And the Poles broke the British-imposed rules, like not socializing with the indigenous population. The children, especially, were growing up immersed in other cultures. If they were being raised to be Polish, they were also becoming something else.
Ule kwenye ndiwa tunaruka wote kwenye ndiwa mayai tukawa ni rafiki.
We used to go to that river and we swam, we jumped from the big rock, and that one was high, so we could jump from there and we could dive. It was very dangerous, but we used to do that.
Wa kuongea na wao ni wao, sisi tunawafuata. Hata wengine walikuwa wanakuja mpaka kijijini huko.
If you go and start, you know, they start to see you, that you are open to them like they are to you. Next day they come and they ask you to come to their house. Come and see us.
Tafutia wale wengi walikuwa wanasarau sana na kutuona kama manamba, lakini wale walitufanya kama wanadamu. Kwa hiyo ndio tofauti yao, ndio.
Was it home?
Africa? No, never to me. Never, never. Because it was nice there, it was lots of fun, I had lots of friends, but because I was sick so often with malaria, to me, I couldn't, when we found out that we can leave, go to England, for me was, not fast enough. I started with malaria. The first attack was when I was in Iran. I was in the hospital for a while. So I'd very often, practically once a month, I used to faint in school, and they used to send me to hospital. We had one ambulance in the camp.
Where was the hospital?
It's on the hill near the orphanage. We go up the hill. And I mean, to look from the bottom down the hill, it looks beautiful.
I grew up hearing more about Tanzania than I did about Poland. This hadn't just been a refugee camp, but a full Polish town of 5,000 people. I tried finding people who would remember my grandmother, but there was little of the Poles and nothing of her. The round huts were all torn down, and the refugee camp had been turned into a college. The only place I could connect to was the camp hospital, where she'd almost died several times from malaria. My camera kept pulling me towards this shot. It was like I'd felt her presence, as if part of her might still be here, caught in time. It was only those who died in the camps who had left behind any physical trace. I started seeing the cemeteries not as a negation of life, but as proof of it. If you know where to look, there are Polish graves sewn like a thread from Siberia down to South Africa. It might not be written in books or on monuments, but the history is there, written in the earth.
This should be here. This is the map. This is the map that shows Polish refugees camp around the world during the World War II. Yeah, Polish refugees camp all around the world.
How many years have you worked here?
30 years now, from the year of 2001 until now. 30 years, yeah. And I've inherited this site from my father, who worked and lived with this Polish community for many years. From the year of 1942, when they opened the camp, until the year of 1952, when they closed the camp. This one, this is the history of the World War II in Swahili language. The first one that I put there, I put the history of the World War II in English. All families, including children and old people, were transported to the Soviet Union, to Siberia, to Crimea, to Kazakhstan, where they were forced into slave labor under extremely difficult conditions. And then to Iran came Iran, Iraq, Palestine, Libya, India, Africa, and Mexico. This is the history now in Swahili language. In Swahili, it means kama nikiwasahau, Mungu muumba wa mbingu anisahau. And then in English, If I forget about them, you, God in heaven, forget about me.
Polish Catholics, Jews, and Orthodox Christians being buried together represented the country that the deportees had carried out with them. The refugees who survived, like my grandmother, expected to go home and rebuild that same country. But while Europe was celebrating the end of the conflict, the Polish refugees in camps across Africa were finding out that they wouldn't be going home at all.
The first shock, of course, was that when the war ended, they couldn't go home because Poland had been given to the essentially controlled by Moscow. Very few people who had gone through the Gulag had any desire to go back to a country that was ruled essentially by the Soviets, by Russia.
Find inspiration in the splendid example given by the Soviet people.
In the 50s, I actually got introduced to Churchill's multi-volume history of the Second World War. This is when my heart broke, because it was way back then, through Churchill's own writing, that I realized how incredibly badly Poland was treated. It was like a Greek tragedy, because, you know, in a Greek tragedy, you can see the final end coming, and you know that it's irreversible, nothing can stop it. So you sort of saw the betrayal coming, and of course it did.
Well, where could we go? Because that Belarus, that was under Russia. So it was just like going back to Russia. So it wasn't really safe for us to go back. No, we didn't want to go back.
The first Polish refugees who returned to Poland after the war quickly figured out what going home would mean. Suspicion, questioning, and in some cases, re-deportation to Siberia. Tens of thousands of Polish citizens in refugee camps across Africa and the Middle East bided their time and tried to figure out what would happen next. Not only did the Western Allies now have to determine where these stateless people belonged, but also how to explain their situation. During the war, British and American newsreels said that Poland was a victim of the Nazis. But if the Poles in Africa had been victims of the Nazis, and the Nazis had been defeated, why weren't they going home? After 6 years of a war that started with Poland being invaded and occupied, it still wasn't free. It was fully occupied by one of the two countries that had invaded it in 1939, the Soviet Union. While the Polish refugees across Africa were eventually resettled in England, Australia, Canada, and other countries, they were left off the post-war monuments, and slowly, over time, their story was quietly swept away. Where you were born, it used to be Poland, now it's not, it's Russia.
No, it's not Russia, it's Belarus.
So are you Polish?
Yes, we are Polish.
Yeah.
Pure Polish. Our
Yeah.
parents are from Lublin.
From Polish,
Lubelski.
parents from Poland.
Yeah.
And it was Poland.
We
It
have
was
Polish
Poland.
school and everything. Don't think that we are Russians or something. No, we are pure Polish.
So if you spend your whole life overseas, where is your Polishness? How can you be?
Well, we go.
How do you be Polish?
We have our churches. We have our organizations. They say all my children they went to Polish school when they were young, in Canada.
So we still feel
They all
Polish,
speak
really
Polish, except my grandchildren. They don't speak Polish. They understand, but they don't.
You know what I say? I'm foreigner here, and when I go to Poland, I'm foreigner there. Yes?
But why you feel foreigner here?
Well, not English.
You live
not,
so many...
pure English. So I'm foreigner here. And I go to Poland, I'm foreigner
I don't feel like this in Canada. No.
I don't feel like
I'm
that,
Canadian.
but how it is, don't you think it is that?
Yeah.
You're not really Canadian, you didn't born there.
Yes, I am Polish Canadian.
But that's only.
But I am Canadian. 100% Canadian.
The survivors ended up in countries where what happened to them was completely unknown. There was no context for what happened to them. So you had these individuals who had been deported and came out, settling in countries where no one had any inkling of what happened to them. And many survivors never even talked about it to their children.
One of the things that happened, not immediately, but eventually, starting with the 70s, there was a big intellectual shift to the left. So by the time I got to university in the 80s, to do my master's, I started hearing very strange things, and I didn't realize how much had happened in terms of the approach to the history of this, because a lot had happened. And I had one Marxist professor, and we were discussing the war, and I mentioned the Soviet Union's invasion of Poland and the deportation of all these people, and he flatly said, the Soviets didn't do that. They never deported anybody. And so, in my innocence, not that I was very young, I was already 40, but I said, but of course they did. My family was deported. They must have been fascists. But it was quite a shock to find out that this is what happened to my history.
The Soviet Union was in the winning side of the war. And certainly, while the war was still going on, and in the very early post-war period, none of the Western allies wanted to make a fuss. They didn't want to bring to the foreground any crimes committed by the Soviet Union, which had helped to defeat the Nazis. And once the communist regime was created in Poland after World War II, it was a completely taboo subject. For 40 years, there could be no public discussion of the civilian deportations. So this is a story that largely has remained in the shadows.
The damage this did was you had several generations raised and educated in communist Poland who were never taught the truth about their own country. And then you had several generations raised and educated here with the same problem. And so you have this terrible distortion. And I think it plays mind tricks on it. It's not good for our mental health. I don't think it is.
For all of the stories connecting Poland and Tanzania, I was one of those raised without understanding where we were from. My grandmother was among hundreds of refugees from East Africa who'd ended up in Montreal in the 1950s. I grew up in a country full of people carrying ghosts from other places. It was only when I started asking questions about her own that I began filming her, recording what only existed in her stories.
It's better.
And I only filmed her a few times before she died unexpectedly. After her death, boxes of old photos and documents were handed to me from among her belongings. There were images of things that she'd never told me about. Maybe she'd forgotten about them, Or maybe she just wanted to keep them for herself. Without her voice to guide me through them, they were the faces of strangers. I found a photograph of my grandfather. He'd been taken to a Nazi concentration camp as a slave laborer. With this one photo and the name of the camp, I could tell his story more easily than hers, even though he died before I was born. When the war had started, our families had rushed to bury the deeds to the land under one of the buildings. I thought of how many families had done the same thing, and of all the things that I'd never thought to ask, and of everything that would stay buried forever. When her voice was gone, the connection to my own history felt gone as well. So I put everything away for 2 years.
Pivo, huh?
Тут дом был метрів 120, більше, як конюшня в этом.
Это местечко спалили, да?
Є.
Ну, як виїхали вони.
Ну, и они не выехали, их вывезли. И они сами не поехали. Лес тут был кругом толстый, уже вырезали раз. И видишь, эти сзади, там за вами его. Не, тут не садили, само наросло.
I came back to Belarus needing to find out what was still left here, and found buildings still standing from the farm. A cornerstone from 1861, written in Polish, had been laid out by the people who built this place. On top of the wall next to it, faded Soviet graffiti, written in 1941, claimed this building for the communists. On their own, neither of these pieces explain what had happened here, but maybe it was the space in between them that did. Where does your Polishness reside?
I think you've got it, Jonathan, in the memory. But no, memory of what? I never lived in Poland. Never. I was conceived in Poland, but I wasn't born in Poland. You know, I think it resides in my curiosity. I really had to know what happened. And that's why I can never talk about this and only tell my own story. Because no matter what related to my own story, as soon as I became aware of it, I had to find out more about it. So I was constantly going to books and eventually to archives and things and talking to people. I had to know more. My curiosity has driven this, I think, you know, almost since my teen years.
There were documents, and still are documents, in many, many places about this historical episode. In reality, there wasn't much interest or awareness of it for people to pursue it. One issue is that they're not in one central place. Documents are scattered across the globe along the path that these deportees traveled, from eastern Poland into the interior of the Soviet Union, across the Caspian Sea to Iran or Palestine, then maybe somewhere in Africa or India, New Zealand. There are documents about them in all of these places. And then finally, documents that individual families have in the many varied places that they settled. For way too long, the stereotype, the mythology has been that war is about armies. It's about the armies of two countries fighting each other till one wins. But we've seen again and again throughout the 20th century and certainly now in the 21st century that war engulfs civilian populations, not incidentally, but as a main aspect of the violence of the war. You know, we really need to look at the experience of women because that shows how complete the aims of the Soviet government were in destroying Polish society as it had existed. Because women, because of their social roles, are in charge of keeping the family together. You know, making sure that the children are doing well, that they have enough food and clothing, and also that they learn their history.
Потому что это начало конца.
Джон,
Yes?
эту или эту?
This one.
Эту?
Yeah, пожалуйста.
Тихонько. Это все мое. Так что приезжай, работай.
You come here and brother
No.
with
Bring my brother? With my brother?
that.
Yeah, I hope my mother, my brother, to bring some there.
Okay.
You understand?
Привезти.
Okay, look over here.
Потом Кирилл.
1, 2.
Ага, 3.
almost 200 years, through 2 world wars and a half a century of communism, these buildings had survived. And now, only 2 years after I'd first seen them, I was watching the last pieces of my family's connection to this place being taken apart and carted away in front of me. The next time I came here, there would be nothing but forest. I finally understood why my grandmother had been haunted by everything that was no longer there, but which her eyes still drew onto the landscape.
We always talk about Russia, from when we was young. We have always lots to talk about and remember things, and I miss that very much.
So you know, I went many times to Belarus, and when I went back this time, I went to the spot in the woods where the house was, and I was able to find something from there. So.
Oh, the bricks! Oh my God! Oh, that was nice. Thanks. We keep that. Only one thing I can't carry in a pocket. Yeah, there will be from fireplace or where there was.
Yeah, or the
cellar and things, but I think it more like because in the fireplaces it was very big.
Yeah.
You see, I still remember all that.
Yeah.
And
you know, there's not much left there, but
no,
the little pieces there are, for me to find that in the woods, it reminds me of all the stories my grandmother told me, that you told me.
Something real from there.
Yeah, that was your first house?
Yes, that's my house.
And this?
Well, I mean, after all, I've been here 50 years. 50 and a half now. From 1966. And I think March or April, no, February, we come here to this house. So more than 50 years now, I'm here.
Yeah.
So that's my Poland. That's my Poland. Or Belarus. Whatever. My home. My home. My really home.
9 years after I first interviewed my grandmother, I found her history laid out as bare facts. It had taken me as long to find this as my family had been refugees. "18,000 of these pages laid out the life details of Polish refugees arriving in East Africa after surviving Siberia. There was a page filled out by my grandmother in Tanzania in September 1943 as a 14-year-old child refugee. I thought about my professor, who had questioned the history because he hadn't read it. Did this paper carry more weight than what she'd told me? Coming home to Montreal, I got an email from the archive saying that they had uncovered footage from the refugee camp in Tanzania for a film that was shot but never made. And when I watched the video, it was full of images that I'd spent a lifetime imagining. Only a few thousand women and children made it from Siberia to this refugee camp in Africa. Of them, only a few dozen made it into this rejected newsreel footage. And walking in the exact same place I'd looked for her 5 years earlier, I saw my grandmother's face walking in front of the refugee camp hospital, young, malarial, 3 years after being deported to Siberia, far from home, and smiling. I thought that there'd been nothing left to find when I'd stood in Belarus and Tanzania. But finding this film, I understood that the longer I looked for our history, the less it would be erased. It was 1988, the last year of communism in Poland. It was the marriage between the children of two Polish refugees, and the towns that our parents and grandparents were from were no longer in the country they'd been born in. I was 11 years old, the exact same age as my grandmother when she was deported. Nobody knew that in just over a year, the country would be free. According to Communist Poland, the people in this room didn't exist. But there they were, forgotten wanderers who would sing to me in Polish, in Farsi, and Swahili. It was a room without monuments and no one truth or official book to turn to. And through stories told from mothers to children and from grandmothers to grandchildren, they were keeping their history alive, and it was a lifetime act of defiance.
Pustej życia pogoni żyje posępny lud. Brzęczą mu chroje nad bagnami skrzypi, jadący burz czasami poprzez grząską rzekę brud. Czasem ozwie się gdzieś łosia w dzikim gąsu górska krzyk. cisza, niezmącona dusza. Śni pustką rozmarzona, pięknie o Polesiu sen.
Polesia czar, to dzikie knieje moczary.
Polesia czar,
Polesia czar, smętny to wichrów
i w ciemną noc z bagien wstają opary. Serce me drży, dziwnie ogarniane. I słyszę, jak z głębi wód jakaś skarga się miota.